JFM News at 17 hours, we take a look at the headlines. Operation Young Vote says stakeholders must be allowed to monitor the mobile insurance of NRSCs. Stakeholders call on the Ministry of Education to convene an endeavor to discuss the way forward for non-examination classes. In international news, South Africa's health minister has said the country might surpass its recent surge of coronavirus cases by the end of August. And in sports news, clubs in next season's European competitions could be forced to forfeit matches if they fail to inform UEFA of travel restrictions in places to curb the spread of COVID-19.
Joy FM News. Truth in defense of freedom.
With the details at 17 hours, my name is Lwando, Cheleka. Operation Young Vote OIV says it is appalled at the stance the Ministry of Home Affairs has taken to stop organization from monitoring the implementation of the 2020 mobile insurance of the National Registration Cards (NRCs) by the government. OIV Executive Director Ges Nyarenda says the pronouncement are misplaced in that the exercise is related to the forthcoming voter registration exercise by the Electoral Commission of Zambia (ECZ) and the 2021 general elections. He has since charged that the sudden apprehension by government on citizens monitoring on how a service is being provided to members of the general public leaves a lot to be desired. Mr. Nyarenda has since challenged government to exhibit transparency and accountability by monitoring of the exercise.
Says that this exercise is not an ordinary issuance of NRCs that happens in districts, but this is a special or an extraordinary activity because it is linked to the electoral process and the elections that are coming in 2021. So for us, we are completely taken aback by the sudden apprehension that the government is exhibiting of, stopping citizens from monitoring this exercise. Because when government is providing services, citizens are free to monitor the provision of those services. And this issuance of NRCs is one of such services that people need to monitor. And this is not the very first time that Zambia is conducting the mobile issuance of NRCs. It has been done before, and monitoring has been going on through a government so apprehensive and in a way wanting to run away from transparency and accountability. This is unacceptable. If this exercise is to yield the desired result, I think government must just allow civil societies and citizens to conduct the monitoring of the implementation.
The Ministry of Health has disclosed that the country has recorded 229 new COVID-19 cases, bringing the country's cumulative total to 7,022. Ministry of Health spokesperson Ebo Kawalo has disclosed that 84 patients are currently admitted with 45 on oxygen, with 5 being in a critical condition. He adds that the country has further recorded 3 new COVID-19 deaths in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of deaths to 176.
Zambia has recorded 229 new cases of COVID-19 out of the 1,112 tests that were done. We have, unfortunately, and on a sad note, recorded 3 new COVID-related deaths. 1 female adult from Intestage, as I earlier mentioned, who came in as a BID, brought in dead. 1 43-year-old female who was admitted to a private facility, and 1 71-year-old non-hypertensive who was being treated for severe pneumonia at our Levi Manawasa Isolation Center. This, therefore, brings the cumulative number of COVID-related deaths to 176. In summary, what we have is a cumulative number of COVID cases in the country now stands at 7,022, including 176 deaths and 5,667 recoveries.
Meanwhile, the National Union of Private and Public Educators, NUPE's President Victor Muyumba, has urged the Minister of General Education to convene a consultative meeting to discuss the way forward for general education in the country following the closure of schools in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Speaking this morning, Mr. Muyumbe has noted that the Ministry of Education needs to plan a way forward for non-examination classes.
Consultative at the Ministry of General Education, they need to call for a consultative meeting on what should now constitute the kind of learning policy if things are to get back to normal. Should we try to look at which topics are more important than the others so that the teachers, even as they teach, concentrate on such topics? Because we have children that are in grade 11 this year. Next year, they're supposed to be in grade 12. And at the end of the year, they're supposed to write. But if this teacher starts from where they ended and wants to finish everything, they may not finish the syllabus for grade 11 and grade 12 by the time we'll be getting to the end of the year next year. But if topics are isolated, topics are picked on the basis of importance, and then presented to the teachers that these are the topics we are going to cover, especially for those classes that will be writing exams next year. It will be something that
a National Action for Quality Education, case Executive Director Aaron Chanza has noted that most rural schools have struggled to meet with health standards due to the inadequate availability of school desks. Mr. Chanza has also expressed worry at cases of COVID-19 that have been recorded in some schools. He has since called on the need for the compulsory testing of all school-going children currently attending classes following the surge in COVID-19 cases.
According to our fears, the fears that we had before in rural schools were confirmed when schools were in school. Some of us, learners, for example, in Kawambwa, in Sinsali, in Western Province, some of them were not keeping the distances. They were actually sitting on the floor. We shared these pictures and the report with the ministry. Of course, government released some money to buy sanitizers. But with the infrared thermometers up to now, we have not seen a lot of schools having these, meaning that learners have not been tested. Obviously, the one which is coming now doesn't have a bite. Settled. But as you know, the cases have settled. We've seen
doesn't even have
cases being reported. I know cases in Rufunsa, one case at Livala. There are also cases in Ufrida, and also we heard of a case in Imbala. The cases are not so many, maybe because learners have not been tested. But of course, 2 weeks ago, we called that these learners that are in examination classes must be tested, because we cannot authoritatively say that they are safe. When communities where they're coming from are recording such numbers of cases, especially with the BIDs that we recorded.
But Minister of General Education Permanent Secretary Jobix Kalumba has noted that the ministry has done its very best to ensure that learning continues in the wake of COVID-19. Mr. Kalumba has, however, conceded that there have been some lapses in the interventions that have been put in place. He has since called on the private sector to come on board and supplement government efforts during this period. He adds that so far the ministry has put in place all guidelines to ensure safety of learners in schools.
Started at least to do something that can help our boys and girls access education. Though I should confess that it's not a perfect thing that we have, we have done. The only way that we can embark on is one, community radio station, where the children can be accessing lessons through that platform. But even that is not enough, because there are some households where the parents don't have radios. And this is where we are calling upon the NGOs, if they can help us with small radios, which can be distributed to all the children in Zambia, in those rural areas where there is no television signal. Yeah, we should also be mindful, my dear, that I have traveled around the country, and in the remotest areas of Zambia, we have no trace of this COVID that is being talked about in urban areas. So it's not all the schools where we should expect people to have thermometers.
Meanwhile, the Anti-Corruption Commission says it has arrested the former Senanga subordinate court magistrate for corrupt practices involving over 1,000 kwacha. ACC Public Relations Manager Timothy Mono has disclosed that Mr. Chama Mutambelio, aged 50, of Kamwala South in Lusaka, has been charged with one count of obtaining money by false pretenses contrary to Section 309 of the Penal Code Cap 87 of the laws of Zambia. Mr. Mono adds that Mr. Mutambaliro has since been released on bond and will appear in court soon.
Chama Mutambaliro, age 50, of Kamwala South in Lusaka, was charged with one count of obtaining money by false pretenses, contrary to Section 309 of the Penal Code, Cap 87 of the laws of Zambia. Particulars of the offense being that the accused on date unknown, but between 1st October 2016 and 31st December 2016, whilst working as a magistrate at Senanga Subordinate Court in Senanga District of the Western Province of the Republic of Zambia, did by false pretense obtain 1,200 kwacha from known person, purporting that the said money was required as logistical support for him to undertake a court scene visit, when in fact not. He has since been released on bond and will appear in court soon.
Joy FM News, truth in defense of freedom. Let's take it to the, let's take it to the man. Let's take it to the, take it to the, let's take it to the man. Let's take it to the, take it to the, let's take it to the man. Let's take it to the, take it to the, yeah, baby. Apple Max, cool, real, and natural. A quality product from California Beverages.
Nsonga kubalimi wonse mwebava mu kitundu kya Lwemba ate mu Northern Province akampani ka Pioneer kanetlako imbuto ya mataba ipya ile itwa P32W. Iyi muto ile papa wa makombo ba mataba yalikoza kuchilala na kumpese yaliba iyabeka kabiri nangula imbuto ilokile kufikapo yena ila mmena n'okukula ifo ba Pioneer City Company twasumino kutila ti inflate watu na salia lelo chaba ne muto mwabika mushiri ericho byale ni muto ya Pioneer P32W pakutila mwinga kamkulwa kabiri n'okuletela obukumu buntu mukabila imbuto ya mataba iya Pioneer P32W ile sangwa munchende shonse umushishwa imbuto ele no majepo byale ni muto ya Pioneer no kumona obukumu what it I only sit for your papa harvest quality speedy Pioneer sustainable seeds Pioneer seeds for the papa harvest Pioneer. And now international news.
In international news, South Africa's Health Minister William Kize has said the country might be over its recent surge of coronavirus cases by the end of August. But he warned that the risk of a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic still remains and containment measures must continue to be imposed. The BBC reports that Mr. Mkize told a virtual media briefing that cases are tapering off in 3 provinces, including the commercial hub of Gauteng. South Africa has been the hardest hit in the continent and ranks 5th in the world in the number of confirmed cases. At least 15 people have died and more than 1,500 have been forced from their homes after torrential rain triggered floods and landslides in South Korea. South Korean Prime Minister has called for 2 areas to be declared disaster zones after 42 consecutive days of rain, the country's longest monsoon in 7 years. According to the BBC Rescue report, rescue efforts is being complicated by coronavirus restrictions. There are fears that crowded shelters could spread the virus. The Interior Ministry said efforts were being stepped up to keep displaced people in temporary shelters, mainly gyms and community shelters, distanced from each other. Fabric screens are separating families and individuals in beds are being spaced apart to encourage social distancing, they said. And now in sports news. Clubs in next season's European competitions could be forced to forfeit matches if they fail to inform UEFA of travel restrictions in place to curb the spread of coronavirus. According to guidelines issued by European soccer's governing body, UEFA said it would publish a list of non-travel restrictions between countries before each draw is made. Clubs would then have to inform UEFA of any other unknown restrictions at least 48 hours before the draw, failure to which they will be handed a 3-0 defeat. UEFA also said that if a club was drawn against an opponent that was not allowed to travel to the country, then it must find a neutral venue for its home fixture. The rules will apply for the qualifying rounds and playoffs of next season's European competitions. As well, the news recap of the headlines. Operation Young Vote says stakeholders must be allowed to monitor the mobile insurance of NRCs. Stakeholders call on the Ministry of Education to convene an endeavor to discuss the way forward for non-examination classes. In international news, South Africa's health minister has said the country might surpass its recent surge of coronavirus cases by the end of August. And in sports news, clubs in next season's European competitions could be forced to forfeit matches if they fail to inform UEFA of travel restrictions in place to curb the spread of coronavirus. On behalf of the entire production team, this has been Lwando Cheleka. Thank you so much for your time. Bye for now.